Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I'm going to talk about violent video games today because I just witnessed a young child, probably about 6, at a library, a public library, which are now privatised, of course, and his brother was behind him on the other computer. He probably would have been about 9, 10. Now, the game that this little boy was laughing at and having a lot of fun on was himself shooting. It was a shooter game. It was actually a video on YouTube. So he wasn't playing a game. He was being entertained by a violent video where it's in the perspective of the one viewing. So as you know with the games, the children often, they select the guns and then they are the ones simulating a shooting. But we're talking mass shooting here. A lot of dead bodies on the ground, little boys laughing. And I'm trying to do a proposal on the other computer and I'm hearing the kid laughing and I look over at what he's looking at and I'm just going, oh my God. Part of me gets actually quite angry about this because I've been a peacemaker. I had the support I needed from government and business, and had our community had sufficient awareness, I could have done a lot with Real Hope. This is the Real Hope program, which I'll talk about in a minute again, because I had strategies on how to bring into schools non-violence and anti-bullying and peace for kids. And I sit there and I see this child on this game, or on this, I don't know what you'd call it. It's a simulated training for killing is what it is, if we want to put it in a nutshell. I know from my own research at the SAS, Special Air Services, and I know the special services and the US military and the Australian would be using video games to train soldiers. We have this enormous tolerance around putting violence in front of our families, which is, to me, from a peacemaking point of view, is absolutely gobsmacking would be the word. I just go, what the? I can't believe it, that we think it's all fine. The parents just leave these kids. And I've seen another child dumped at a library in the same sort of situation, playing a really violent game. Parents go, oh, well, it's not real. It's just a simulation. We train through the simulations. I'm a trainer. You get people to act out behaviours and it goes in through the neural networks they learn. This is how we reprogram. What do you think school is about? Kids get put in front of instruction and they get into activities in order to integrate the knowledge. So no, it's not just a film. I've also, years ago, I was with the Conflict Resolution Centre. It's actually a longer name. It was at the University of Melbourne, actually. They were doing work in the UN. They were actually going overseas doing activities to actually de-escalate violence. Now, they got defunded, as those of us in the non-violence area do, and then there'll be a small, or quite a large group actually, who'll go, oh, left wing. No, it's not left wing. I was inspired into peace because I dreamed I was teaching peace. I was a market analyst prior to that. I'd never thought of peace in my life. When I had the dream, this was back in 1998, I woke up in the middle of the night and I started reading something that was very important, that triggered me. It was literally an awakening to peace at that time. Prior to that, I'm like everybody else. After that, my whole life changed. Never was the same again. It was a shift. We talk about the transformational changes now. Mine happened back in 1998. It was massive. Everything fell out of my life, my partner, my work. Peace was the most important priority. And since all these years later, so that was 1998, it's now nearly 2020, we're just about around the corner. So 22 years. I've been inspired by this, and ever since I have not stopped working. I've worked every single day on peace. You'd think I'd be an expert by now, which I am. You'd think I'd be earning a lot of money by now. Like most peacemakers, we end up in either lower end jobs because we want to work for peace, unless we now make it economically viable, because I've seen someone who's done that and she was assisted all the way to the top. But I'm a true peacemaker, and I mean, I don't want to necessarily say that she's not, just to be fair to her too. She got inspired when she saw poverty on the streets, and she actually helped women. What she actually did was great, and I totally applaud her. I'm talking about the mentality of those who helped her rise to the top, which was nothing to do with, it was more to do with how women, how she was being seen. Sorry, I'm not being clear there. How she was being seen and how it reflected on that organisation. There was a care factor of 0, and I know there is because I've had dealings with them. And it's not even to disparage those people who don't care. I understand it to be, they don't seem to have an experiential understanding of the importance of peace. It's not in the common vernacular. It's not a subject that comes up. We talk about war infinitum. We talk about terrorism infinitum. We talk about the military infinitum. But the peace narrative is completely marginalised. And I now know today that there's deliberate reasons why that's so. And it's to do with politics. It's incredible to me. I was never political, is what I feel to say. And some would say, well, you are today because I'm writing lots of blogs, but I'm not. What I find is that whenever I feel the world is heading off into a direction that is not going to serve it, I start to investigate because I feel this very strong sense of responsibility for humanity. That's why I do what I do. I don't care at all about the politics. I see people as people. When you've been a clown like I was for a very long time with Patch Adams in Russia, in orphanages all over the place, giving love to people, you drop the program narrative of that other because you just see humanity. That's what happens. I was trained in humanity through experiential education in Russia. And in fact, I did know, but I didn't realise the gravity of what Patch was saying when he was bringing a small group together to give unconditional love in these settings. I now know today what he did for me, and he changed my life without doubt because I saw how beautiful the humanity is through him. Had he not had the courage to stand up to those who think indifference is fine and let the suffering go eat cake, and there are mentalities out there who are in positions of power who think like this. Had he not awakened, and he awakened out of his own suffering too, so often suffering can lead you there. So I'm just sort of pointing that out, that is why I have this strong awareness. Now, harking back to what I was talking about, which was the Conflict Resolution Centre at the University of Melbourne, who then got disbanded, was what I was saying. Well, they got defunded was what happened, and then they resurrected themselves through the University of Queensland as they sought to find shelter. They were homeless, no doubt. They were chucked out of the psychology department. Conflict resolution. It's a central precept, I would think, in psychology because it expands awareness through deepening empathy. Because when you're in a conflict resolution type process, you're listening to the other party, they're listening to you, you've got a facilitator there, a third person, who then will ask questions and say things like, okay, you've just said what you needed to say. Is there anything else you want to add? They go, no. Okay, you've just listened to that. What do you want to ask any questions about what you've heard? Is there anything you want to get more insight into? So you're opening up a dialogue is what really is going on here to help the two parties take responsibility for the conflict and resolve it peacefully without arms. See, conflict resolution is the third way here that gets no press. The dedicated individuals around the world who are minuscule compared to the great industry around militarism, there's just no comparison. The military gets the centre stage, and then we worship heroes from the past without really understanding the carnage of war. Now, we'll go back to the Resolution Centre in a minute. I'm just feeling a desire to diverge again. I saw in the newspaper someone is coming out and talking about the First World War, and I've been feeling inspiration around the First World War since 11/11/11. I had a meeting at 11 a.m. on the 11th of the 11th, and they all stood up, put the hand on the heart like an American, and paid their respects to the fallen. This is the war of 1919. It's now 2020, over 100 years ago. We're worshipping things we don't even know what they are. We don't even know who they are. We have a very vague idea of Weary Dunlop. We have a guy on a donkey, Simpson, that gets peddled out. But this, I know where I saw this. It was at Shipper Library. A guy's going to come and talk about it. He's talking about the enlistment of 13 and 14-year-olds in the First World War and how everyone knew about it and just blind-eyed let them go. These were little children who were trying to prove their manhood. So this actually links back to the little children that I saw today. One was 9. He was close to that age. These men are quite prepared to send off to war, First World War. And I'm also aware from some of the readings that I've read from the Anzacs themselves, who called the ones in authority the heads. This was not a kindly term. They saw themselves as being put in the front line. They were, the British were not necessarily in that particular piece that I read, were not in the front. The Australians were. And the Turks, of course, lost way more than the Australians, but that's not really the point of this. The point I'm trying to make is that we are glorifying things that should not be glorified. The killing of one person or another, or 100, or 1,000, or 100,000, or 1,000,000, there can be no justification for murder. Anyone in a civil society does it, they go to jail. How is that different from a war setting where there are other powers at play here who are all jockeying for position from a global political point of view? It's not about defending democracy or defending the people, it's about retaining power. And I guess because I've come into this understanding through my reading, a lot of reading, I've come to realise that things were not what I thought. So I understand the public getting caught up in the sort of this, what would you call it? Worship is the word that comes to my mind. We kind of worship them or we celebrate them. We say it's disloyal to state a comment that countervails this, and it's not. We use nationalism as a means of bringing that group together against another group. Now, I'm a peacemaker, so I'm all for bringing down those barriers. I'm also trained in conflict resolution, so clearly those at the very top should be talking. Why are they using the public to fight their battles? It's a little bit like the bullies who are bullying those in their group, and the group that they're with, the kids that they're with, let's say they're children, they want to be part of the group. So they want to impress that other. And so they go off and they get told to do something that could be hurting someone, or stealing something, or to prove themselves to the group. Now, extrapolating that out to the international level, all these men and women get persuaded to fight for their country. Are they fighting for their country, or are they fighting for interests? Are they fighting to maintain the power of the few? These are very, very important questions, because I'm linking this to the violent video games that have been justified through this adoration of war, this worshipping of war. And anybody that has anything or says anything that's countervailing to that is somehow disloyal, a traitor, whatever. This is how bullying works. I know I'm trained in the area of anti-bullying. We undermine that opponent. We belittle them. We destroy their reputation because we want to win. So we're really talking about a mentality of win-lose. In conflict resolution, we talk about a mentality of win-win. This is why we bring the parties together to talk about the problem, for them to then recognise that what they believed prior to the discussion was untrue. And I would say in 99% of cases it's untrue. We, coming out of our own filter, our own education, our own culture, our own norms, and believing that this is the right way, the other is wrong. But we're living in a global village where there's lots of diverse viewpoints. And even within the country, you've got huge diversity in amongst people of the same nationality. This is why dialogue is promoted. It's to get clarity around what you've believed. It's also to come face to face with the person. And that's courage. There's no courage in shooting people who you can't even see. You have to use a lens to see them, or dropping bombs on people you don't even know. That is not solving a problem. What that's doing is obliterating what you think is a problem, not recognising that when you problem solve it, you may come to a different conclusion. That may not actually be the real issue, and then all these people have died for nothing. This is very important to be heard. And I, as a human, I then go into a deeper perspective, and I think of each individual person. My mind casts back to Cambodia when I was at Tua Salong prison, which was an old high school, again, a link to children. In fact, the guy who ran that prison, he was an ex-high school teacher. In fact, I think he was the high school teacher. Pol Pot was an architect, I think. I could be wrong on that. But the one who ran the prison, he was ruthless. He was a teacher. Scary. I saw the photos of the people he murdered at that prison. I've also seen the people that were murdered in Santiago in Chile. I've walked along the photo boards there too. I've also seen in Cambodia, just going back to Cambodia, this is in Phnom Penh, I've seen the torture chambers where they were laid out and they were tortured. I was shown the torture techniques. I was with the Rotary Peace and Conflict Studies program in Bangkok, studying we were candidates from an international group, selected from all over the world to come and study there. And they took us to this place. I remember feeling the distress in this place. It was so overwhelming. It was tangible because people have been tortured and murdered. They weren't allowed to cry. Can you believe that? People were lying on these beds being tortured mercilessly. They used scorpions too, I might just add. Imagine what they did there. They were being tortured mercilessly and they were not allowed to cry. There was a sign out the front saying that. That's the ultimate in cruelty. You can't even, that's how oppression works. That's why I'm not for any sort of control, surveillance, totalitarian society. No, thank you. I don't want it. Because the minute that comes in, we lose all rights. These were all innocent grandparents, parents, and children that were tortured to death. Now, those who didn't die at Tulsa Long Prison were taken out to the killing fields. People might want to Google that. There were trees where they would smash babies. I'm just going to tell you like it is. I feel like I want to cry. It's horrid. We were showing all the skulls in that museum through the glass. It's quite a popular image. It's certainly not popular in a positive sense. It's a horrific image. All their skulls, teeth, were all piled on top of each other in this sort of glass, sort of like a museum. There are a lot of holes and ditches where they buried people. And I was just mortified. It actually deepened my desire to work for peace. See, the ones at the top, they become so brainwashed. And this is when we have a compliance type of mentality where you just get plugged in, you're told what to think. I have real issues with this, and I just want to say this publicly. I have real issues with this. When I've seen how horrendous the outcome of that type of totalitarian thinking is. Now, in the case of Cambodia, this kind of spilled over from the Vietnam War, which was another war that McNamara, the Defence Secretary, stated was in the fog of war they got things wrong in respect of the relationship even between the Vietnamese and the Chinese. They were not great mates. But because of the paranoia within the United States about communism, which really I've come to realise after, again, more work that I've done on this, was really about power. It had nothing to do with the organisation of society, whether it be a capitalist type society based on industrialisation, what they call free markets. Are they free markets? When they try to totally deregulate it, it's free to the point of we can do pretty much anything we want. And there are, in economics, we call it externalities. There are things like pollution. There are things like mental health issues that can come out of, being abused at work, toxic cultures, toxic chemicals, whole raft of outcomes when people are not playing by a set of fair rules. And that's what regulation was about. So that's your capitalist, your capitalist system is this idea of competition in the markets. The communist is really just the central government, central planning coming out of one body, which doesn't have a parliamentary setting. It's one party. It's a one-party system. But then we could even argue in Australia, if both sides of politics are starting to sing to the same tune in respect of responding to power brokers' wishes, we also end up in a one-party system, which is probably and possibly why this concern raised by Andrew Wilkie, who's an MP in Tasmania, ex-intelligence officer from the National Office of National Assessment, he has warned publicly of this totalitarianism, Orwellian type police state, he called it. But it certainly, we've had police states here before up in Queensland. I was actually working for the Fitzgerald Inquiry, typing up police, interviewing police. So I became privy to the corruption inherent within the police force there. And what it made me think actually was to not say anything if I ever find myself in a situation of interrogation. Although I probably will, knowing me. I'm very open. They don't have to torture me, I'll just tell them. So going back to where I was leading from before, which I've gone back to, this is now the second time, Conflict Resolution Centre. It was actually ICRC, International Conflict Resolution Centre was the name of it. They, as I said before, they were being defunded from the University of Melbourne. University of Queensland took them under their umbrella. They were homeless, remember? And the reason I'm feeling determined to come back to this point is I had the privilege of hearing a speaker. It was here in Melbourne, because they did try to run courses in conflict resolution here for another year or two, I think. I think they've been, again, disbanded. See, there's no political or intellectual will to ensure that non-violence is embedded in our children. Absolutely essential if you don't want shooters. So this speaker that came, she was from the United States. I can't recall her name, but I remember sitting there listening to her. And she was actually one of the first researchers to jump on the non-violence issue in respect of television. So she is of an age where she recalls the first black and white televisions coming in to the United States, violent images being projected, and it was her assessment that they changed behaviour. There have been numerous studies done that have also indicated that when we get repetitive images played out in front of us, we mimic. When those images of violence are of males, we're starting to get more females, but predominantly it's males who are seen as warriors in the glorification of the soldier in order to make that attractive, to make it like a manhood thing. So you're willing to kill another human being. To murder a human is nothing to do with your manhood. There is nothing courageous about pulling a trigger. The hardest part is actually sitting down later and talking about your feelings. That's far harder. And then talking about how you felt when you pulled that trigger and what it did to you. Now, I've met soldiers, I've had a lot of experience, so I'll bring it in. I met some soldiers who'd come back from Vietnam, actually. This guy was highly stressed when I met him. And I was doing the work of Byron Katie at the time, and I still regret that I didn't pursue helping him. I should have done more for him. He'd killed a little girl in Vietnam, and I was at a barbecue. This was with Rotarians, actually. And see, I feel upset because I'm remembering it. He was really upset. This is after Vietnam. He's still got the war going on inside him. Years later, he's still fighting in the Vietnam War. But the haunting image that comes to him is the little girl that he killed. Because you couldn't trust anyone, could you? The civilians could be Viet Cong. And this is where civilian casualties is a really big issue, which there is a seemingly loosening up of Geneva Conventions, rules of engagement around the murder of civilians, because a lot of war now is taking place in civilian areas. That child I was watching this morning is in the position of the shooter, and it was a military guy, that's why I brought up the military, shooting people with a machine gun. We're talking mass murder in an urban area. Now, I invite you to write to me and tell me how that preserves the peace in the future. When we're looking at a child of 6 laughing whilst they're mowing everyone down, and it's very real to life, this is not cartoon, it's real to life. Child actually feels they're the one shooting and killing all these people. There's blood and guts, everything on the ground. I'd like someone to write to me and tell me how that preserves the peace when that child is getting positive feedback from an activity that's fully violent. Now, I interrupted that child and I said, "Excuse me, can I talk to you?" And his brother was there, and I said, "I'd like to talk to you as well." I said, "I noticed that you're looking at these violent games, and I noticed that you're shooting a lot of people in the game, in this image. I said, war is not fun. I said, in the real wars, and I said, I've been to war zones myself, people get killed. And it's horrendous. I said, if it was your family that was being shot in front of you, you would be absolutely screaming. It's actually not fun. And I said, what you have to understand is that if you keep playing these games, you're going to think it's okay what you're doing. You're going to think that this is just fun. And you'll think there's nothing wrong with killing people. So it causes a lot of pain in our world. I said, I'm a peacemaker. I believe in peace. And I said, I've been a clown. I've been around the world as a clown. I spoke to them like this, so I'm not talking down to children. I never do. I talk to them as I talk to you, same. Because I have this real sense of equality with whomever I'm talking to. And I said to him, these little boys, I just went, I was a clown and I clowned all over the world. I had a lot of fun. I juggled, met a lot of people, had a lot of fun. I said, it's great to get outside, and go and play. You don't want to be inside all day. I said, because if you keep staying inside and watching all this violence, it's going to change your life. It's not going to make you happy. Go outside and have a good life and look at things that are positive. And I said, I'm not saying this to try and frighten you about what you're doing. I said, I'm just doing it because I care. And this little boy's, his mouth was, he was just looking, he was listening. I could see him. And that's how children are. They just take it all in. And the other little boy was lovely. These were Asian boys, they're beautiful boys. The other boy was lovely too. They got that I wasn't trying to be annoyed with them or anything like that. And then the boy went straight back on and kept playing. And I'm thinking, oh God, how could I influence children when I'm up against industrial military complex? I'm up against a whole world that supports violence. How do we get across that this is not healthy? And at the same time, and this is another very important diversion, at the same time, the police have announced a conference on domestic violence of women. Well, where do you think that's all coming from? It's coming from the normalisation of violence within men. It's not rocket science, my friends. It's not. You don't even have to do much research to see the links are clear. There's nothing sexy about murdering someone. There's nothing exciting about beating a woman to a pulp or a woman verbally abusing her husband. There's nothing beautiful in any of that. They're all violence. So they're all talking about that, but then you don't know whether the actual discussion is about suppression of civil rights. We just don't know. More police are coming into the police force given the civil unrest regarding the environment. This is not the solution, because what happens is we end up suppressing people. There's no responsibility taken for the culture of violence that's been created around all of this. The militaries have become incredibly sophisticated. They are involved in destructive activities with the environment as well. The explosion of nuclear weapons, the weapons testing, 2,000 atmospheric tests before the moratorium. How many underground after that? We then go, oh, why have we got cancer? We're in a culture of violence is what we're in. When we have media beaming into our houses, smart meters monitoring everything we do, NBN coming in, this is all market-based activity that promotes violence if it pays. Clearly it must pay. keep people afraid, then they are not likely to speak up. This is a traditional mode of control that doesn't create livable cities or happy societies. It actually is highly suppressive of human desires and human happiness. Those little children will grow up with great anxiety. I've already seen a child who's been constantly exposed to violence. He kept thinking someone was going to break into the house. He was absolutely terrified of being alone because his parent had allowed him to watch whatever he wanted, had him sitting on his computer for hours and hours unsupervised. These children in the library were unsupervised. And I just look at the library and go, no child should be accessing this material. This is seriously going to program them. It's not to say this little boy's going to end up being a shooter. It doesn't necessarily follow, because I don't know what his life path is. But what it instills within him is the normalisation of violence. In my book, A Fool for Peace, I do have some information from a professor who was engaged with peace and conflict studies in Dublin University. I will put a link to the book on this video because I think it's extremely important. I'm also going to have other links on this video to talk about children and violence. Now, people like myself who are teachers of peace, who are completely marginalised in our society, this is not economically exciting for people, even though they're, and I say this, with a flick of the hand, really, yes, you can make a market out of this, but I don't really particularly want to. I actually see it as very honourable to have had a calling in this area, and I see a very strong sense of social responsibility within myself to speak up on behalf of children who are being exposed to imagery that's going to traumatise them and is going to embed within them the okayness of violence. And I just see a total hypocrisy around that from those in authority throwing up their hands going, why have we got a violent society? Let's disarm them. And, of course, there's other agendas around the disarmament of society in the United States Second Amendment. They can defend themselves. But when we have totalitarian, or what they call the totalitarian tiptoe comes in very slowly, but it's coming in, there is an agenda to disarm. So where do these children go who have been wired for violence? What happens then? Do we end up with a civil war? Because they only know problem solving through the extension of power, through violence. They haven't been taught mediation. They haven't been taught peace skills, like what you see in another is in yourself. That's called projection. They don't know how to question their own thinking. They don't know how to question negative beliefs in recognition that those negative beliefs are a lie, because they feel bad. They don't know that people are not having a go at them, they're just seeing differently. They don't know that war is a failure of diplomacy and that war has a market-based agenda behind it. They don't know that. They think they're defending something because that's the propaganda that's been narrated as to justify violent actions. We're in defence of XYZ, when in truth we are extending power, violence, in service of business interests. That is predominant rationale in today's world. And others might be in defence of this attack because there's a whole story created around these things. But the one story that's not spoken about is the real peace, is that we don't need to go to war at all. A mature, civilised society with an awakened consciousness that what it does to another returns to the self, and it does. That's the law of cause and effect. And these children don't know that. What they put out comes back to them. This is a higher law. Also, they don't know that when they murder someone, that they carry the guilt of that crime for the rest of their lives. They'll be in and out of institutions. They'll have post-traumatic stress disorder, which a lot of soldiers have. They don't come back happy and singing. They come back traumatised. Why is that? Because they were put in positions of creating abuse and violence towards civilians predominantly. There may well be some soldiers in there, or what they call insurgents. There may well be an opposing army that's been funded by whom? These are big questions that have to be asked. And we're certainly getting more and more information these days that the problem is returning to its maker. So wars are being created in order to profit. There's even profiting from reconstruction in those war zones. There's profiting through accessing the oil, creating huge disruption, which is clearly a military word, in order to access something of value. This is the economic paradigm playing out here. That does not see that the human life is the greatest value, far, far more valuable than any oil, than any gold, than any resources. The human life is far more valuable. Why do I say that? Because I've seen the value of each human life. If I was to put some of these decision makers on an island by themselves, they would then get to experience social isolation. They would also get to experience some time alone with their own thoughts, and that may not be fun. But the most important thing they'll discover is that they're lonely. They'll be desperate for human company. But we leave them there for a couple of years. They have to go through their dark night of the soul, you see, face their demons that they've been projecting onto other people to do their dark work. Because anything where you're engaging in the murder of civilians, where you are training people to murder people, there's a karmic response. Now, most of those in authority won't believe that, but I can assure you it is true. What goes around comes around, absolutely. Cause and effect. So when you engage in violent activities, this is the shadow I talked about in the previous video. The shadow comes across the heart. It comes across your eyes too. You can't see clearly. This is the fog of war. That shadow, this absolute impulse that you have to win because somehow your dignity, some might say saving face, is more important than your life. Well, no, it's not. Speaking truth to yourself is more important. It's not about being seen to be and not be humiliated in front of your peers. It's to have the courage to stand alone when everyone is against you. That's true courage. The most courageous people are unarmed, as Scott Ritter said at a lecture here in Melbourne. He was the senior weapons inspector in Iraq. He was ex-CIA. He said the pacifists are the most courageous who go and confront those with arms when they could just shoot them. But they refuse to shoot them. The peacemakers have enormous courage because they believe in peace. It's so deeply embedded that they cannot harm that other. I'll bring up Falun Gong here because they also have experienced huge persecution. They were actually an ancient healing art. It's a healing modality is Falun Gong, Falun Dafa. It's been around for thousands of years. But because so many of them came down to Tiananmen Square in defense of someone who was arrested, that alarmed the Chinese Communist Party at the time. They became very alarmed. And then they orchestrated a crackdown. Now, a lot of them, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I suspect a lot of them are women engaged in this peaceful meditation. Strength, forbearance. Can't remember what the third word was. I've interviewed Falun Gong. when I was in Canberra. Woman, her husband had been killed by authorities, taken away, killed. She came out to Australia, and I see them sitting in front of the Chinese embassy. There was a point where Alexander Downer, who was, I think, foreign minister at the time, tried to ban protest outside the Chinese embassy, which is rather interesting. I want to bring this up because my inner feeling told me to this morning. I actually had a feeling about this, and it's in connection with this issue, interestingly enough. They are doing what I do when I go into still point, except I suspect that they're far more skilled than I am. They go into deep meditation. So the war in this particular case is the war against God. And I'm afraid that's a war you'll never win. You can kill millions of people, but you'll never win it because this is a power far beyond our human understanding. I don't have a full comprehensive understanding of what this energy is. I just know that I feel it. Whenever I promote love, I know that it's active within me. And what happens, because we're in a duality, those who have had the shadow come right across their heart, these are the ones that are really negative, really angry, into control and power. From a chakra perspective, we'd be saying that they're coming from their base chakra. Illumination, which I was talking about in the previous video, comes from the crown chakra. So you have all these chakras working up through the body, the solar plexus, heart chakra, throat chakra, third eye chakra, crown, I think that's how it goes. I'm not an expert on the chakras, but I've looked into them. So when you're operating from a base chakra, it's survival, it's sexual, it can be, very basic instincts. Solar plexus is about power. That's why we often feel it in our gut when we feel threatened by someone who's projecting power at us or bullying us. We'll feel it in the solar plexus. When you're in love or feeling great love for someone or something, you're going to feel it in your heart. When you're speaking, the throat chakra is the one that's active. I've done some healing work with the chakras. I have done that. And it's interesting. It's really about energy. So Falun Gong were meditating to connect. I'm just going to go still because I'm going to connect to them for a minute. The way I would describe it is that they're going into the real world. They feel incredibly peaceful. I'm just feeling their hands for a minute, just where their hands are. They have it in a triangular shape. They're directing energy. Another one which is popular, I saw it in Hong Kong, so popular in China as well, is Tai Chi. And I've had a go at Tai Chi as well. And even conflict resolution is about Tai Chi. It's about getting the art of Zen. I think Zen, not Zen, but it's I just have to go to the point where this Aikido. Aikido is the martial art, which is peace-based martial art. Because I'm just getting that with the flow as I'm flowing like this. When I teach about conflict resolution, I'm talking about you having a discussion. You're having a discussion with the other party. It's a flow. I might disagree with you. So if I was Chinese, for example, and I was a peacemaker like Lao Tzu, who's my teacher, I would be saying to the other party, okay, so you like violence. Maybe they don't like violence. Let's reframe it. So you have committed violence and you think that violence is the way to ensure your power, because that's the reason why they all do it, no matter the stories. Why do you think you need to be violent in order to have power? You need to frighten the other in order to stay in position of power. Is that power? Is that real power? What is power? Well, power is I feel confident, I feel in charge, I feel I've got control over what's going on, I feel important, I feel powerful, feel I can do anything. So that's really what people are aiming for when they go for power. I want to be able to have whatever I want. So does everybody else. And that's where the clash happens. But I'm doing it in this way because what I'm saying is when you come into the flow, you don't have to go and fight it out like this. I'm going to win one way or another, like toss you over. The real power is flowing with that other party because they are the mirror of you. They are the mirror of you. They are the same as you. But you are projecting onto them enemy because you feel threatened that they may seek to take your power. And we see that in the China-US trade war. Of course, there's agendas over and above that too that want to bring in the totalitarian global state. And, really, from what I'm certainly discovering, there is an intention to collapse the United States, which is very concerning, not only for those in leadership, but for the people themselves, because that's seen as a barrier to this totalitarian, we're talking the New World Order type scenario, which people will be familiar with by now. And this is what happens when you have a market economy that gets out of control, because the market economy is totalitarian in itself, in that the leadership basically order people what to do. They have their hierarchy within the company. It's not democratic. So inevitably it was going to manifest into global political society because that's the way they do things. It's not actually illogical, to be honest. But the sort of ideals of a democracy, which is what kept everybody happy and on that treadmill, was that they believed they had a vote and they had a voice and they could get rid of those buggers if they didn't like them. But when the gloves come off and the mask comes off and people start to recognise that actually there is no freedom of speech, it's only being permissible because there's still beliefs in it. But ultimately, those who hold the power are not interested in what you have to say or what I have to say. It's an impediment to their agenda for control, which is to try and remove anything that's unpredictable, anything that counters them, because they just want to go ahead and enjoy doing whatever they want. And this is what happens when one becomes completely disconnected from humanity, and it really does show up in a disconnect where they don't care at all. When we see hundreds of thousands of people being murdered in war zones, the actions and decisions that permit such a massive crime scene either have to be extremely pathological in their disconnect, that they feel nothing for the other party, which is very possible when you're trained in this way through simulated war games where the other is just an object. Now, this is not dissimilar. I'm just going to now make the link to the domestic violence that the police here in Victoria are having their chat about. The objectivisation of the female is why she's beaten. He becomes enraged because he didn't get what he wanted. Let's just put it into the he. I know there's female violence too, so just note that I'm always scanning on all sides because I'm interested in the truth of these matters. But let's just put it into the traditional and predominant form of physical violence is occurring through males over the top of females because females are physically weaker. Women tend to be have very good verbal faculty, like you can see with me. I have a very good verbal faculty. very clear mind. I'm very able to articulate what I feel and what I think. There's an integration in that. Now, if I'm with a man who has difficulty, which many do, in expressing his feelings, which doesn't mean he's inadequate, but he might feel inadequate. He might feel overwhelmed. She's onto everything. Because women are very good planners. They're very good organisers. They organise the family, organise everything. They're on top of the game, many of them. They have to be. They're the mothers in many cases. He may want to sit down, have a drink. He's not been raised to do females' work, so he has no empathetic connection to that. Let's just use that traditional idea. She's exhausted, she gets angry, something goes wrong. He loses his temper and he gives her a whack, or he gets uncontrollable with it. He may well have had a father that did it to his mother. It could be that the violence is programmed in an unconscious way or a conscious way. Typically it's conscious. He would have seen it. He's also seen it reinforced on television, so we've got multimedia. He's seen it reinforced in the military. He's seen carnage in war zones. We see the objectivisation of women in magazines. We see constantly now. I've got a whole heap of emails coming into my main email about sexy women, have sex with women. If you want sex with a woman, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on. And I just look at it and I just go, that's why. We've got ourselves the trafficking of women for sex because of big demand. She's an object. If she's on the street, like she's homeless, because I suspect there's a huge trade happening through homeless sector as well, because they're vulnerable. See, this idea of vulnerability has to come up in this discourse as well, because what I see is those who get picked on through bullying are the ones who are perceived as vulnerable. Same applies at the global level, when we've got countries that have disproportionate share of the world's wealth, who have highly technological, who see the whole of the world as a chessboard. They shuffle their resources across the world to the cheapest locations in order to maximise profit. This then gives them inordinate power because they've got huge profits. They get acclaim through that. They get political access through that. They then get into a position where they can position politicians to then, or those politicians could be from the industry itself, placed into the parliament in order to advocate for their needs. That's how power works. Democracy, on the other hand, is supposed to work quite differently, but we won't worry about going into that. The point is that vulnerability is where insecure others attack. So the image of the bully is not actually an all-powerful being. It's a mask of a insecure, inadequate person who's feeling not enough, because you would only project control and bullying over someone if you yourself feel somehow diminished by that other and you want to make them pay, or you believe you can intimidate them to give you what you want, or you might be doing it as a form of propaganda to be seen to be. This is not the true power, as I've stated already in this. And this is what we're teaching young children. There was a shooter incident in the last 24 hours. I very vaguely heard Trump speaking to the murders at a school, another school. How many schools? Now, what they'll do is they'll argue for disarmament in the United States, but they won't drive to the actual problem of the violent media industry, the violent gaming industry that is now deeply embedding violence in boys, perpetuating another generation of violent men, not men that are masters of their own destiny, not men that are highly skilled and exhibiting incredible talent and ability that furthers civilization. No, They are creating more violent men who are going to create more disruption, who are going to destroy families, who are going to destroy communities if they decide to become shooters. So they're planting the seeds of further destruction through this free market economy which says violence is fine. That is how you recreate the violence within your own society. The denial comes up and says, no, we don't. It's just a game. No, it's just a film. We know it's not true. When any psychologist or expert in this area can tell you any type of repeated patterning is going to become habit, that habit becomes behaviour. If we keep thinking violent thoughts, what you think about, you bring about, and you have to understand this. This is the law of attraction. It is a real universal law. If you keep thinking people are bad, people are evil, people are dangerous, and you arm yourself up with the thought that you could be attacked and you're just simply being sensible, protecting yourself and your family, you're in an illusion. You're simply escalating. You're preparing for war. When we come into a higher consciousness, we will start to prepare for peace. That means we don't fill our heads with violent images. Television would never be used for violent anything in a highly evolved society. In a highly evolved society, what you do to another, you do to yourself. In a highly evolved society, you don't destroy the very life support systems of a planet. You ensure that those support systems are absolutely maintained in homeostasis. In a highly evolved society, you don't even send people to jail. You would help them to see the consequence of their actions. You would take them through a learning process of recognizing what that might feel like. You would develop empathy. You would create a society that knows each other, that lives together, that shares, cares, reveals, and heals together. That's called community. Now, that community, everybody knows everybody. In that community, that levy of ensuring people do behaviours that are actually going to promote that society, they will do that because they're known by everybody. You don't need CCTV cameras. You don't need the cameras. You don't need to keep preparing for crime. You won't have crime because everyone knows everybody is stealing from yourself. You would, in a highly evolved society, be working towards the betterment of others. You would be helping them to get ahead. You wouldn't be discriminating against certain people. You would have an egalitarian society. It would be a love-based society where the children are raised in balanced families of peace and harmony, where they see their parents modelling love. The parents aren't working all day and night or separated or fighting. The children would be witnessing parents dialoguing with each other if there's a problem to be solved. They'd all be sitting around the family table as equals, discussing the problem and solving it as a family. That's what a highly evolved world looks like. Violence would be considered astounding, unbelievable, incredible that anyone could actually hurt someone. That's the mentality I come from. It's like I still get amazed that people could actually hurt other people and want to. That's very primitive. If we're to make the jump to a better society, a society that thrives on this planet, we have to actually change. And that means rethinking. This is the point of rethink. This is the reset that we're going through right now. And that reset is giving us breathing space to decide the sort of future we want. Do we want a society filled with violent images? Anyone that steps out of line. And I'm actually going to bring in a story here very quickly because it feels important. I met a Holocaust survivor. Very, very beautiful woman, an amazing woman. She was speaking actually at a Rotary Club at Port Loma, I think it was, in San Diego in the US when I was there. Beautiful woman. I went up and talked to her, and we held hands, actually. I felt so much love for her. And we organised to meet in Carlsbad, which is to the north, I believe, of San Diego. And we actually went and walked through a peace garden together, her and I. She was the one that told me, and that's why I'm bringing this reflection up, she was the one that told me that she was in line for the gas chamber. This is totalitarian regime of the Nazis at this time, okay? So this is serious stuff when we're talking totalitarianism. There's a zero tolerance in this. There's no freedoms. And if they get it wrong, bad luck. You just see you later. So she's standing in the line. They had the Alsatian dogs. You step 1 inch out of line and that dog will go you, rip you apart. So they're terrorised. She's a young girl at the time. I think she was 12. She was terrified. And I can't quite remember her name right now. I'd have to look her up again. She's in my book, A Fall for Peace. But I remember her. I will never forget her. So she gets to the top of the line, young girl, and the Nazi goes, so your name is, and he said her name, and in German it means lucky. He goes, so do you feel lucky? And I remember her saying, she said, I hope so. Little girl, you know. So he sent her to the right, I think. I think the right was work camp, left was gas chamber. So he just makes it up as he goes. Because no one's questioning him, are they? He's not going to jail for murdering innocent people. So he sends her to the work camp. She said that the work camp, they work them to the bone. So this is slave labour. And we're seeing little pockets of people working for nothing here in Australia, and people don't realise, you know, what this is priming. You know, we've got people coming in on work visas. They don't get the same rights as we do. You know, this is how things get chipped away at, and it's a gentle sort of change that's coming in, but it's ultimately removing rights from people. And whenever that happens, totalitarianism opens up. So in her case, she was saying they worked incredibly hard. They slept on the floor. The women used to give her food. So this is a community of women. They used to give her food to make sure she would survive. Because women would have been dying left, right and centre in the work camp because they work them to the bone. They give them nothing. They get sick. Anyone that's seen any footage of the Auschwitz, places like that, they would see that they were absolutely skin and bone. This is what fascism does. And even in other countries, including that one, the people have to become very conscious of totalitarianism. It favours no nation state. It's actually a mental health disease, not unlike the greed. The greed is as well. These are imbalances in the human psyche, presenting as power, presenting as strength, presenting as the parent that knows better. You have to be very aware of this. So I'm going to finish up in a few moments, but just by saying that what triggered this video was my observation of a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old playing violent. Well, they weren't playing, they were watching violent shooters. It was in the guise of a violent video game, but it was basically moving images that were very real. And the child was following a soldier who was mowing everyone down. It was mass murder, bodies everywhere, blood and guts in an urban area. That's what triggered this whole narrative, where I've extensively gone into explaining that what we see does change the neural networks. When we actively play in it, it's a simulation. This is experiential education, which embeds that practice into us. And if you're very, very young, like this 6-year-old was, it becomes the very basis of the foundational thought that sets that child up for life. It also can be the very basis that begins anxiety, depression, suicide. If this child continues to watch these games and play them, they will rewire the neural networks firstly in the brain. It will actually not fully develop empathetic and social networking in the brain. The social patterning in the brain is myself speaking, for example, to you. Like if you're in front of me, we're having a conversation. I'm developing my social capability, which enables me to read people. It enables me to learn how to communicate with people, to hear another viewpoint, to learn how to debate, to negotiate, to discuss, to get angry, to get passionate. It's how we touch one another is through spoken word. Now, if children become insular, they become shut down, they become paranoid about other people because they're watching violence all the time. They lose their ability to communicate, to empathize, to relate. They're going to become dysfunctional psychologically. They're going to see the world in objects. The object of things, the internet of things, same thing. We are in the human form because we're meant to interact. We're meant to physically interact, hold, touch, feel, express, get enthusiastic and excited about life. We're meant to dance. We're meant to juggle, play, everything. This is why we're in a human form. We're not an avatar in a cyborg world. But that's what you're going to create if you continue on with supporting and saying nothing about what these children are being exposed to, because it's dangerous to them. It's dangerous to their mental health, and it's going to send them down a trajectory where they're not going to be happy people. Now, those unhappy people can end up hating the world. They can end up arming themselves, and we see what's happening in the United States, which is no mistake, that children are being shot in schools. Is that the world you want? Or do you want to start to speak up, deal with the problem of violence and the commercialization of violence, because that's what this all is, and start to map out another world that's possible? Now, in my real hope, you're welcome to go to my program, www.worldpeacefull.com. That's peace, nonviolence, anti-bullying work. It's also the power of play, which is what the clowning does, the juggling does. It teaches children to play, which they don't actually naturally need any instruction on. They naturally play and muck around and explore and quest. This is what children are about as they develop themselves. But if we program them and not develop them, we got ourselves a major, major problem. So this video really is on behalf of all the children of our world, because I feel a very, very strong sense of social responsibility for them. As a peace educator and a clown, I love children deeply, and I want a world that's fit for them. Like the young girl Greta, who's standing up for a better world, an environment that actually is maintained and sustained appropriately, who wants the men to stop being greedy, and the women too. There's a lot of women who are up there now. They want the greed to stop. They want you to stop thinking about money all the time and start to think about your impact through your commercial activities, your political activities, your cultural activities on the children. They are crying out to be heard. And for those who aren't aware of what's being done to them, they're going to be extremely angry later on when they realise the setup. So this feels to me in this video as a warning. And I felt it before I did it. It's a warning. You have to make a choice about the sort of world you want for your children and grandchildren, because this is the moment. This next few years up ahead, we're going to be making some decisions. One pathway will lead us to an infinite possible future. The other one is really, I see it as a spiral to the bottom. I know it's not sustainable because the planetary systems can't sustain human species that's unable to relate to its natural system. Now, the peace work that I've told you about, Peace is Our True Nature, is my blog, but it's also the essence of what sustains on the planet. Inner peace creates outer peace and homeostasis. There is a future there. So we all get to choose. And with that, I send you definitely peace, illumination, reflection, and a double think in respect of the future of children, particularly. Thank you. Bye.